Pick it up. Feel the weight. Cold at first, then it warms fast, the way only smooth things do. The surface is porcelain hard, glossy, almost wet to the touch without being wet. Turn it over, a flat underside, split down the center by a narrow serrated slit, like a tiny mouth with teeth. It fits perfectly in your palm. It weighs almost nothing. Its name is Monetaria moneta. In Latin, that translates with zero ambiguity. Money, money. The scientists who classified it didn't need to be creative. The name had already been earned across 30 centuries, 4 continents, and more transactions than any mint in history has ever recorded. It was the main monetary instrument of the largest commercial network that humanity has ever built. A network that connected China to Mali, Bengal to Zanzibar, the Indian Ocean to the Atlantic coast of Africa, all before a single European bank had issued its first note. In 1250 BC, when the emperor's favorite wife was placed in her tomb in the Shang dynasty capital, her attendants buried 6,800 of these shells alongside her jade and bronze. As a store of value, the most liquid asset her household possessed. By the 14th century, a single gold dinar bought 400,000 of them. By the 18th century, European trading companies were loading entire ships with nothing else. And then, in the span of a few decades, the same companies flooded the market with so many shells that the entire monetary system of West Africa collapsed under the weight of its own supply. Here is what this episode will show you: the precise mechanism by which one small archipelago in the Indian Ocean controlled the monetary supply of half the ancient world, and exactly what happened when that control was taken away. The architecture of that system is not as distant as it sounds. You will recognize it before this video ends. The shell did not fail because it was primitive. It failed because someone figured out how to print it. In 1817, a rebellion erupted in the eastern province of Orissa, in present-day India. The British East India Company had just done something that seemed, on paper, entirely reasonable. They abolished the cowrie shell as legal tender and replaced it with silver coins. Clean, modern, efficient. The population refused. The cowrie was not just currency, it was the entire architecture of daily economic life for millions of people. The shell paid wages, the shell bought rice, the shell settled debts between neighbors who had never seen a silver coin and had no reason to trust one. When the company abolished it by decree in 1805, they didn't replace a currency. They pulled the floor out from under an economy. The Pike Rebellion of 1817 was, at its root, a monetary crisis. To understand how a shell reached that level of systemic power, you need to understand where it came from. And that answer is precise. One archipelago, one species, one address. The Monetaria moneta existed in waters across the Indo-Pacific, but the shells with the correct weight, the correct gloss, the correct uniformity for monetary use came from one place: the shallow lagoons of the Maldive Islands, a chain of coral atolls sitting southwest of the tip of India. What made the Maldivian cowrie a global monetary instrument was 4 properties no other commodity in the ancient world possessed simultaneously. The shells were durable. They did not decay or degrade over centuries. They were uniform. Each shell weighed roughly the same, carried no variations that required expert verification. They were impossible to counterfeit. No artisan in China, Bengal, or Mali could manufacture a shell that passed as Monetaria moneta, because the shell was a biological object with a surface structure no human tool could replicate. And they were scarce enough to hold value. The distance from the Maldives to the markets that used them meant supply was naturally throttled by the logistics of ocean travel. This is what monetary economists call a hard asset, an instrument whose supply cannot be expanded at will by any single actor. The cowrie was the hardest asset the ancient world produced, harder than gold because gold could be debased. A cowrie could not. The shells did not collect themselves. Every morning in the atolls of Ari, Huvadu, and Hadunmathi, Women waded into the lagoons at hip depth and pulled cowries from the rocks beneath the surface. A single collector gathered up to 12,000 shells in a day. The living animal inside was essential. Only shells with a living snail retained the surface gloss that gave the cowrie its monetary credibility. A dead, weathered shell was worthless. A dull cowrie was a rejected cowrie. Once collected, the shells entered a processing sequence that took several weeks. As Ibn Battuta recorded in his Rihla after visiting the Maldives in 1343, the mollusks were buried in pits where decomposition proceeded underground. The shells were then washed repeatedly until each one emerged clean, white, and hard. Only then were they transferred to the royal treasury. The Maldivian sultans did not simply export a natural resource. They operated a sovereign production and quality control system, a mint in every functional sense, except the raw material was biological rather than metallic. No shell left the Maldives without passing through that system. This is monetary sovereignty in its oldest documented form, the exclusive authority of a political entity to issue, control, and validate the medium of exchange used across an entire trade network. The shells left the Maldives on the monsoon winds. The Indian Ocean operates on a precise seasonal wind pattern. The southwest monsoon from May to September, the northeast monsoon from November to March. Arab, Indian, and later Chinese merchants understood this calendar with the precision of modern logistics software. They arrived on the northeast monsoon, loaded their ships with cowries, using the shells as ballast, solving two problems simultaneously, and departed on the southwest monsoon to Bengal, Zanzibar, or the ports of the Swahili coast. Ibn Battuta recorded that over 40 ships, loaded exclusively with cowrie shells, departed the Maldives annually. The 14th century Chinese traveler Wang Daiwan documented the exchange rate in Bengal: 1 shipload of cowries for 1 shipload of rice. This was not barter. This was a formal, recurring currency exchange between two sovereign monetary systems operating at industrial scale. The liquidity cycle, the rate at which currency moved through this network, was governed entirely by the monsoon calendar. Twice a year, the supply replenished. Anyone who controlled a node on that cycle controlled the terms of every transaction that passed through it. To understand the weight of this in practice, we need to look at the year 1344 through the eyes of Aminath, a Maldivian woman working the lagoons of the Ari Atoll at the height of the cowrie trade. Aminath's day began before sunrise. She waded into water still cool from the night, moving slowly so as not to disturb the shells from the rocks. The work was skilled. Not every cowrie was acceptable. A shell with a crack, a shell with damaged gloss, a shell that had spent too long on the beach was discarded immediately. Quality control was not imposed from above. It was understood from childhood. A bad shell entering the supply chain damaged the credibility of every shell that followed it. That credibility was the only thing the currency had. By midday, Aminath had collected several thousand shells, delivered to the processing area, counted and recorded. The Sultan's administrators maintained what historian Jan Hogendoorn, in his landmark study The Shell, Money of the Slave Trade, published by Cambridge University Press, described as one of the most consistent commodity output records in the pre-modern world. Aminath was paid for her labor, in rice, in fish, in cloth, not in cowries. The shells she collected all day were the monetary foundation of economies across Asia and Africa. They paid the wages of merchants in Bengal, settled tax obligations in Mali, and purchased goods across the entire Indian Ocean network. She never spent a single one. The psychology of value embedded in that arrangement is exact. The people who produced the currency were structurally excluded from the monetary system the currency created. The Maldives exported the world's money. The Maldives used silver coins at home. That gap between production and use is the first, cleanest signature of elite capital management operating at a sovereign scale. A currency without verification is not a currency. It is a promise. The cowrie solved the verification problem in a way no government and no mint has ever fully replicated. It verified itself. The shell's biological origin, its specific weight, its surface gloss. These were properties any merchant could assess in seconds with no instruments, no intermediaries, no institutions. You held it, you looked at it, you knew. This is what monetary theorists now call immutability, the property of a monetary instrument that cannot be altered after issuance. A gold coin could be shaved, a paper note could be forged. A cowrie could not be modified without being visibly destroyed. Its integrity was structural, not institutional. The cowrie functioned as a trust architecture that required no trust in any specific counterparty. A merchant in Timbuktu, accepting cowries from a trader he had never met, took on zero counterparty risk. The specific danger that the person on the other side of a transaction cannot deliver what they promised. The shell was the delivery. The shell was the promise. They were the same object. No monetary system since has achieved that. For 600 years, Arab merchants controlled the distribution routes between the Maldives and West Africa. The shells crossed the Red Sea, moved overland through the Sahara, and entered Mali, Oyo, and Dahomey through trans-Saharan trade corridors maintained with the precision of a modern logistics operation. That network had one structural vulnerability. It had a single choke point. In 1515, a Portuguese ship arrived in the Maldives. The captain's name does not appear in the surviving records, but what he carried back to Lisbon, and what his employers understood immediately, would end 6 centuries of Arab monetary dominance in a single generation. The question is not what he found. The question is what the Portuguese did with it next. The Portuguese did not invent the cowrie trade, they hijacked it. For 6 centuries before 1515, Arab merchants had operated the most sophisticated monetary distribution network the ancient world had ever constructed. A trans-Saharan corridor that moved cowrie shells from the Maldives through the Red Sea, across North Africa, and deep into the kingdoms of Mali, Songhai, and Dahomey. The network had no central authority, no charter, no physical headquarters. What it had was something more durable. It had the route, and whoever controlled the route controlled the supply of the only currency West Africa's economies would accept. That network generated wealth concentration of a largely invisible kind, not the kind that appears in royal treasuries, but the kind that accumulates in the hands of intermediaries who sit between supply and demand, taking a margin on every transaction. The Arab merchants were not mining the shells. They were managing the distance between the Maldives and Mali. That distance, measured in months of travel across one of the most hostile landscapes on Earth, was their entire business model. Distance was the asset. The longer the route, the higher the margin. This is rent extraction in its most elemental form, the capture of value not through production, but through the control of access. The Sahara was not an obstacle to the cowrie trade. The Sahara was the trade's most important feature. Then the Portuguese found the sea route around Africa, and the Sahara became irrelevant overnight. The first Portuguese shipment of Maldivian cowries departed in 1515. What followed over the next 2 centuries was structural displacement, the methodical replacement of one distribution architecture with another, faster, cheaper, and at a scale the trans-Saharan route could never match. Ships loaded in the Maldives, routed through Lisbon or Antwerp, discharged in the ports of the Gulf of Guinea. A journey that had taken 12 months overland now took 6 months by sea. The volume multiplied. The cost per shell dropped. The margin that had sustained 6 centuries of Arab intermediary wealth evaporated in a single generation. By the early 17th century, the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, had entered the trade. The VOC operated the cowrie route as a monopoly capital position. They worked to be the sole European buyer in the Maldives, using their naval presence to pressure competitors out of the supply chain. That spread, between 6 sous per pound in the Maldives and 35 sous per pound in West Africa, was documented by the French economist Guillaume Thomas Raynal in his 1772 Histoire des deux Indes. The profit margin on a single voyage ran to 500% or more. The British East India Company followed. The port of Balasore, in present-day Odisha, became the primary hub for the Maldives to West Africa corridor. British civil servant H.C.P. Bell documented the Dutch monopoly arrangement between Maldivian suppliers and Ceylon, an arrangement that gave European traders a structural advantage over any local competitor. Whoever controlled Balasore controlled the redistribution node for the entire Indian Ocean cowrie supply. The shells went through Bengal first, and Bengal was now effectively a British ledger entry. Here is what the forensic accounting of this period reveals when you trace the capital flows rather than the company names. The Portuguese came first, then the Dutch displaced the Portuguese, then the British displaced the Dutch. 3 different national flags, 3 different centuries, but the same mechanism, operating without interruption. Buy at the source, control the route, sell at the destination, collect the spread. It was not the VOC that held the power. It was not the East India Company. It was the method, the intergenerational wealth defense strategy of controlling a supply choke point across successive currency regimes. The actors changed. The architecture did not. Every time a new European power entered the trade, it inherited the system. The knowledge of which atolls produced the best shells, which monsoon window was optimal for loading, which West African ports offered the highest margins, passed from one dominant trader to the next, like a proprietary manual no one ever wrote down, because no one needed to. The route itself was the document. To understand the weight of this in practice, we need to look at the year 1845 and a single decision made in a Hamburg trading office by the firm A.J. Hertz. That decision would trigger the final, irreversible collapse of the oldest monetary system in the world. By 1845, the Atlantic trade in enslaved people had been formally abolished by Britain in 1807. For over a century, that trade had been the engine behind the explosive demand for cowries in West Africa. The numbers tell the story plainly. In 1724, the price of a single captive stood at 8,000 cowries. By 1773, just 50 years later, that same price had reached 192,000 cowries, a 23-fold increase documented by the French trader Prévost in 1748. The shells had flooded in to meet that demand. Now the demand was gone. But the West African economies still ran on cowries. Wages, taxes, food, all paid in shells. The parallel economy built on the cowrie had outlasted the specific trade that had inflated it. Hertz identified a new source. Monetaria annulus, the ring cowrie, grew in abundance off the coast of Zanzibar. Slightly different in appearance, slightly lower in established value. But West African markets, hungry for currency to fuel a booming palm oil trade, accepted it. Hertz loaded a shipment, shipped it to Whydah in the Kingdom of Dahomey, sold it at a profit. Then every other European trading house in Hamburg, London and Antwerp did the same thing. Within decades, as documented by historians Jan Hogendoorn and Marion Johnson in their Cambridge University Press study, The Shell Money of the Slave Trade, 16 billion additional shells entered the West African monetary system. The fiscal collapse was not gradual, it was a flood. Prices stable for generations began to move, then to run. The cowrie, which had held its purchasing power across 30 centuries, became nearly worthless in a single generation. What do you do when someone else controls your money supply and they decide to turn the tap all the way open? The reserve currency transition from cowrie to European coin was not clean, it was not fast, and it was not accepted. Colonial administrators accepted cowries for tax payments well into the early 20th century. Not because they valued the shells, but because the alternative was collecting nothing. The British East India Company formally abolished the cowrie in Orissa in 1805. France moved against it in West Africa through administrative orders beginning in the 1890s. The German explorer Heinrich Barth, traveling through Kano and Timbuktu in the 1850s, documented a king whose annual revenue was assessed at 30 million cowrie shells, a number that conveys both the depth of the monetary system and the scale of what was being dismantled. The monetary sovereignty of the Maldives had lasted roughly 1,000 years. It ended not with a battle, not with a treaty, but with a private trading decision made in a Hamburg office. The choice to source a cheaper shell from Zanzibar and flood a market that had no defense against its own currency arriving in unlimited supply. The Maldivian Sultan did not lose a war, he lost a supply chain. And the money cowrie shells that appeared on Maldivian banknotes for generations, printed quietly into the currency of a nation that no longer used them, are the only remaining institutional record that it ever happened. The collapse did not arrive as a single event. It arrived as arithmetic. In the first half of the 18th century, 16,000 cowries bought 1 ounce of gold on the Guinea coast. By 1820, that same ounce required 32,000. By the 1850s, the number had become functionally uncountable. Historian Jan Hogendoorn calculated that 16 billion additional shells entered West African circulation following A.J. Hertz's 1845 Zanzibar shipment. 16 billion units injected into monetary systems calibrated for centuries around a naturally throttled supply. The 0 point of value, the floor below which a currency cannot fall without ceasing to function, arrived for the cowrie somewhere in the 1870s. The system frayed region by region, market by market, kingdom by kingdom, as each local economy exhausted its capacity to absorb new supply without destroying the purchasing power of every shell already in circulation. The debt reset that followed was not negotiated. It was imposed. Colonial administrations declared cowries invalid, mandated European coin, and built the infrastructure, railways, postal systems, colonial banks, that made paper currency operationally necessary. The financial suppression of the cowrie was not ideological, it was logistical. A currency you cannot control is a population you cannot tax. And a population you cannot tax is a territory you do not govern. The legacy assets of a 3,000-year monetary system do not liquidate on a colonial administrator's schedule. In unregulated rural markets across Nigeria and Burkina Faso, cowries circulated as late as the 1960s. Here is where this history stops being ancient. In 2026, every major central bank among the G20 nations is at some stage of developing or piloting a central bank digital currency, a CBDC. The stated rationale varies: financial inclusion, payment efficiency, reduced transaction costs. The architecture, however, is consistent across every model under development. Every CBDC concentrates issuance authority at a single point. One institution controls the total supply. Every unit in circulation is traceable to that source. The supply can be expanded or contracted by a decision made in a single room by a small number of people, accountable to a political structure that changes every few years. This is structurally identical to the cowrie system at the moment the Portuguese arrived in 1515. One source, controlled supply, traceable flow, a single choke point between issuance and circulation. The cowrie's monetary sovereignty held for 1,000 years because the Maldivian production system was genuinely difficult to circumvent. The biological origin of the shell, the specific geography of the atolls, the seasonal constraints of the monsoon. These were natural barriers. The system's immutability was physical, guaranteed by the Indian Ocean. CBDCs have no equivalent natural barrier. Their supply constraints are institutional, not physical. Every CBDC proposal hands one institution the power to decide how much money exists, who holds it, and when it stops working. The ancient arbitrage that destroyed the cowrie was not sophisticated. Find a cheaper source, move more volume, collect the spread. The actors who executed it were not malicious. They were rational. They followed the incentive that the architecture of the system created. Every monetary system built on a single issuance choke point creates that same incentive. The technology changes, the incentive does not. 3,000 years of unbroken monetary dominance. The cowrie did not fail because it was primitive. It failed because it was too successful. It built a monetary zone so large, so deeply embedded in the daily economic life of 3 continents, that when the supply architecture was compromised, there was no backup system, no alternative, no exit. The economies that ran on cowries could not switch currencies the way you switch apps. They had built their tax systems, their wage structures, their commercial relationships, and their political legitimacy on the assumption that the shell's supply would remain constrained. The moment that assumption broke, everything built on top of it broke with it. That is not a lesson from the 14th century. That is a precise description of what happens to any economy, ancient or modern, when the foundational assumption of its monetary system turns out to be contingent on decisions made by people with different interests than yours. Ghana understood this. When the country introduced its national currency in 1965, it named it the Cedi, the Akan word for cowrie shell. As memory, as a record, written into the currency itself, of what a monetary system looks like when it works, and what it looks like when someone else decides it should stop. The shell is gone. The architecture it ran on is not. You just watched a seashell move empires. There are dozens of systems like this one, buried in archives, hidden in plain sight, still shaping the financial world you navigate every day. This channel finds them. Subscribe, and we find the next one together. Next, we go to feudal Japan, where the samurai solved a liquidity crisis not with gold or silver, but with bamboo. The credit system they built operated for 2 centuries without a single bank, a single coin, or a single written contract that any court would recognize. What held it together was more fragile than any of those things, and more powerful than all of them combined. Bamboo credit, the forgotten monetary system of the samurai. Next, if the cowrie lasted 3,000 years and was brought down by a flood of its own supply, what does that tell you about any currency whose total supply is controlled by a single institution today? Drop your take in the comments.